Hike the trail? Check. Order takeout? Check. Schedule heart checkup? Done. We've all adapted to a new way of living. Keep your healthcare on schedule with Johns Hopkins Medicine, where your health and safety are our highest priorities. We're ready to care for you through virtual and in-person visits across Maryland and the greater Washington region. Your health, our experts, safely caring for you. Schedule your care now. Learn more at hopkinsmedicine.org/safe. Hike the trail? Check. Order takeout? Check. Schedule heart checkup? Done. We've all adapted to a new way of living. Keep your healthcare on schedule with Johns Hopkins Medicine, where your health and safety are our highest priorities. We're ready to care for you through virtual and in-person visits across Maryland and the greater Washington region. Your health, our experts, safely caring for you. Schedule your care now. Learn more at hopkinsmedicine.org/safe.
All right, this episode of the podcast is sponsored by Grammarly Premium. Get your 1 month free trial of Grammarly Premium. Links in the description down below. Also, to get 3 months free of Amazon Music Unlimited. All you have to do is go to my website and click on the link to find out more. Welcome to the Stephen Shiels radio show. Today I've got a guest speaker who I studied at university with named Tim Bruer. How are you?
I'm well, thanks, Stephen.
Tim, you've been involved in jazz music and you've done a PhD in music as well. What was the hardest part to do a PhD for you?
You haven't got it quite right. I did a master's degree, not a PhD.
Master's? Yep.
Let me think about that. The two things that come to mind are, firstly, going back to study after about a 17-year break from my original Bachelor of Music, and having to, the first unit was having to write an essay on, ended up being on a Stravinsky piece, but it was a piece of music I had no knowledge of prior, and I had to write a fairly convincing and thorough analysis of the piece. And from memory, it was a piece of music that accompanied a short, well, they call it a tableau, but it was a short sort of play or something like that. So anyway, it was sort of out of my area. So that was I remember at the time, quite challenging. Sorry, I'm still trying to get these headphones to stay in here. All right. And the other thing was just the sheer amount of work involved in doing the transcriptions, because my chosen topic, even though I changed it after my initial proposition, which is not uncommon in my experience. People go in to do a master's with an idea and then they end up changing, which is what I did. So the original idea was to look at improvisation and whether you should be thinking when you're improvising or not, which is a huge subject, which we could spend hours talking about. But anyway, it turned out to be really one of those things that's a little bit hard to perhaps come up with an academically robust way of perhaps proving a point or approaching that subject. So I ended up doing something that was a little bit easier for me, which was to study the jazz pianist Keith Jarrett, who's my favourite jazz pianist, and to do some transcriptions of three of his performances, and then write a thesis around those. They called it basically a portfolio. A portfolio of transcriptions. But anyway, then even though I had done a few of the transcriptions prior to to doing a master's, I had to do a lot of transcribing. I'm talking about 3 improvised solos, improvised solos on 3 jazz standards that the solos probably were about maybe 3 minutes each, which doesn't sound very long, but it's actually a lot of music. And then the introductions, the piano introductions to those same pieces. So the sheer amount of work of doing that, and then having to, I'm just remembering. Sorry, these damn headphones just won't stay in there. I really need to invest in a better pair that are like you've got. But I do have a pair of Sennheisers, but they don't have the microphone attached to the lead, so I'm stuck with these. Anyway, just to finish up, I'm remembering when I'd finished the transcriptions, which I did by hand because I wasn't, things like Sibelius and Finale and Music Score, all those things weren't as prevalent as they are now. So I did it all by hand. That was the way I'd always done it.
Yeah, look, whenever I would draft out a transcription, I did it by hand, then put it into Sibelius and then into Dorico to play it back as well, because I found pencil and paper was just better, quicker.
I still like it. If I transcribe these days, which is very rarely, because I did so much of it over such a long period of time, I sort of burnt myself out from it. I still do things by hand, and when I'm writing my pieces, even though I've notated them all to music score now, because I actually have that skill, I still write them out in pencil first. Oh, these bloody headphones! God Almighty. So anyway, I was just remembering that the peak of the hardest part of the transcribing, I'd have these pencil scores of 8 or 9 pages or something, sort of laid out on the floor in my studio, and I'd be just going through them and looking at all of the aspects of them that I wanted to discuss in the analysis. And so, it was just a sheer kind of time-consuming workload. That is probably the hardest aspect of it, yeah. Oh, actually, if you don't mind me adding, another thing that was actually difficult, and I don't mean to be negative about the Conservatorium of Music where I did this work, because I really enjoyed my time there, but there were problems with the administration in the sense that I was advised by one person to do such and such, and then advised by somebody else to do such and such, and when I submitted the thesis for the first assessment, I got a sheet of things that were wrong with it, some of which were the exact things that somebody had told me to do.
Oh, God.
So that was, apart from the pretty easily understood blow to one's ego when you've done something so long and laborious and sweated over it, and it's been your love to get some negative feedback, which is, a difficult psychological thing to deal with, and I do remember feeling a little bit hurt by that, but that's okay. You have to sort of, like anybody in the arts, you have to develop a bit of a thick skin to criticism and so on. But apart from that, as I said, it was actually like one guy told me I couldn't do the thesis unless I put in a comparison with Bill Evans, who's obviously another great jazz pianist that was suggested I could make a comparison with Keith Jarrett. Anyway, so the Bill Evans comparison I put in there, I was actually just told, after being told, as I said, that I couldn't proceed unless I put it in to actually take it out. So I got completely contradictory advice there. But anyway, just to finish that particular part of it, once I'd made those adjustments and pulled that out, etc., etc., it was a better document. And it's something I occasionally look at and I'm quite proud of.
What's the difference? I've got a Bachelor of Music. What's the difference between a master's and a bachelor's degree?
Oh, look, that's probably a pretty big question, Stephen. It's obviously it's post-grad, so you're building on like a Bachelor of Music degree, depending on what your sort of major, if you like, or your direction or your core direction is by definition a fairly broad kind of a degree. And then when you do a master's, it's about focusing on something that you really, it's really knuckling down onto one small area of the area that you like to work in.
Yeah, because I know postgrad, it's very, you're on your own, and you got to do all your research yourself, and you don't get as many lectures. Is that postgrad?
Well, look, apart from the fact that I have actually had to teach and mentor some master students at AIM, I was just really one cog in the wheel of those people's study, as it were, if you know what I'm saying. So it's hard for me to get an exact picture of what the master's program was like at AIM, which is where I still teach and where I, of course, got to know you. But I can only really speak with authority about the course as a whole. with regards to the one that I did at the conservatorium, and that was from 2001 to 3, or 2000 around there.
So
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yep.
But just to give you a quick idea, well, you are sort of on your own, but I mean, not really. We would have one academic component, which the first of which was the one I described at the beginning of our conversation, which was called Introduction to Research. And that was about, the essay I had to write on Stravinsky was about getting used to the aspect of research that I would then need to use to do my thesis. So it was useful, and as I said, it was quite an eye-opener for me at the time after having such a long break from formal study. So that was an official lecture. Then I would have a one-on-one lesson, and that to be a piano lesson because that's what I do. I'm a pianist. And that was sort of just like an extended IM lesson, which is what we used to do, what we still teach at AIM, which is instrumental major, of course, which is just your main instrument. So that was just like an extended, they were an hour and a half. So it was like a big piano lesson, but with a specific kind of focus on the work that I was doing for my thesis and the recitals that I would have to do at the end of each semester, of course, of which there were 4. And so there was that. And then there was what we had called a graduate seminar, which was a performance each week that had both classical and the jazz students performing, and you had to do at least minimum two performances each semester. So, and then I had, when I was actually into writing the thesis, I had a supervisor. That was like a couple, actually. It wasn't very clear-cut, which is one of the administrative problems that I referred to earlier. And so I got a little bit of conflicting evidence. But at the same time, I did, of course, have at least 2 people, apart from my actual mentor, specific piano teacher, to bounce stuff off and guide me. So I wasn't really on my own in that respect. But, I mean, you do have to, of course, go and do a lot of research and a lot of solitary work. Yeah.
Do you plan to study a PhD, or is a master's enough for you?
I think at this stage a master's is enough for me. I know it's quite common amongst the musicians that are of my generation or peer group, if you like, to do PhDs. Gary Holgate, that teaches at AIM, who you might recall, he was one of the first sort of jazz musicians of my vintage that I was aware of that did a PhD. Since that time, Simon Barker, a drummer that I've worked with who's on my CD, has done one. Sean Coffin, who is also on my CD, who used to teach at AIM, as I'm sure you know, has been doing one. I don't think he's completed it. The drummer Andrew Gander, who's a very well-known, wonderful jazz drummer in the Australian jazz scene, has done one. Dave Goodman's another drummer that did one. So they're not uncommon amongst jazz musicians these days. But my what's the word? Not momentum. My reason for doing all of the study that I've done, the Bachelor of Music that I originally did, and at the beginnings of a teaching degree that I did before that I never completed, and then the master's degree, have all just been based on wanting to become a better player and a better musician. And so both of those degrees, though I am very grateful for having them, for the pieces of paper that they also are, because it's enabled me to keep my position at AIM and be able to function in the academic world with those sort of qualifications. And a lot of people are sort of impressed by them. And these days I think it is true to say that they are a little bit more important to have, whereas, say, 30 years ago they probably weren't as important. But I've seen those people that I mentioned go do their PhDs, and, I mean, that would be another workload again, like a master's times 5 or 10 or something. And I just simply don't know whether I have it in me. I'm 63 now to do that work. Whether there's anything I'm passionate enough about to want to study it to that degree and put that much energy. And I still feel like I'm bearing the fruits of the study that I did on Keith Jarrett back about 18 years ago, I'm still looking at things that I discovered when I did the analysis of his playing. So probably not. I think I'm a bit more into. I've had a number of CD projects in the can for a very, very long time that I just want to get completed. That's my my current focus.
Because a PhD, you're writing a thick textbook, aren't you? Isn't that what it is?
Essentially, I think it's. Having said what I've said about the people I know, having done the work they've done, I still wouldn't go so far as to say I know exactly what's required. I think it can be a little bit like a master's. It can vary, but you're going to have to write a lot of words. I don't think there's any getting away from that. The one that I wrote was supposed to be around about 10 to 12,000 words, and I ended up writing 20,000.
Wow!
And it's a book of about an inch thick. So that's a fairly reasonably weighty tome. So yes, I imagine that you would probably have to write something akin, in general terms, to a fairly thick textbook as a PhD. But I think it can be quite flexible. I think you can probably. It wouldn't be mandatory to actually write a book, but you'd have to present a lot of research material. And I think that could take a number of forms. So probably it's truer to say that something to the equivalent of a thick textbook, if it wasn't a thick textbook.
Have you published your thesis from your master's?
Look, I never sought out a publisher. It's available if you go to the SydneyCon website. I've got a link that I put I said SydneyCon website. It's the the library. It's in the database in the library. Occasionally, I've seen somebody I was a bit chuffed to read Keith Jarrett's thesis. I didn't read the whole thing, but read a little bit of it. Somebody had cited my thesis and mentioned it. That was quite nice. But no, I never sort of published it outside of the requirements of what I had to do for the degree, which was to submit it to the library and have it there on their database. So that's where it sits, as well as on my bookshelf, of course.
Do you feel like doing a degree in any arts, it can get opinionated at times? Because there's more than one answer to the same problem as well.
Look, I think, in any academic endeavour, I always say to my fellow examiners when we were examining student projects at AIM, and currently in the last 2 trimesters I've been given work in the composition department. So for the last 2 trimesters I've had to confer with 2 other examiners when we mark the final portfolio. Just to give as is obvious, to give a well-balanced response and fair mark to each student. And what I'm getting at is, I always just say, there's so much subjectivity involved. And in fact, as I say, that I can recall one of my mentors in Adelaide, which is where I came from originally, and did my original bachelor's degree, should I say. It's art. So obviously, I don't think you framed it necessarily in the context of art, but I assume we're talking about music and art, and so it's going to be subjective. I don't know whether it's true to say that you might find a regular situation where people have completely opposite and totally conflicting views or opinions on things, probably to a certain degree, probably more like a divergence. But yeah, and you said something about a problem, so I suppose if you were going to talk about it, if you were going to get specific, you'd have to cite an example of the kind of problem you might be referring to.
So I remember we were doing exams at AIM, and we'd have to write certain theory notes, but there's other ways you can write the same answer in music, but we were taught this is the way we got to do it as well. So that's what I'm kind of referring to is, with music, there's more than one answer to the same problem.
Look, I think probably what you're referring to is something that perhaps this might serve to illustrate, is that when you're doing a harmonic analysis, which is a very common thing to do in Western music, of course, and this might sound a little banal, but when you're analysing a chord progression, for instance, you can look at all of the chords that occur within that piece as being related to the tonic key, or you can look at them as being related or as being referencing related keys. So say, for instance, to get really specific, if you had a D seventh chord in the key of C major, you can call that a 2 dominant seventh, or a 2/7, a secondary dominant chord, or you can call it 5 of 5 because it's the dominant of G. So that's two ways of answering the same question. So if that's the kind of thing you're talking about, then it's really just a perspective thing. It's not really a disagreement, and you therefore get into an area of any study, I suppose, which is it's more about the labelling and how you go about analysing and describing things, and just varying traditions of doing those things. And another simple but not unrelated way of describing it is, or alluding to this issue, is the American. There's a recent American system of analysis where you don't use uppercase and lowercase for major and minor. You just use all uppercase, but you specify the chord type rather than using the old uppercase for major and lowercase for minor. So that's a simple, perhaps a simple example of the sorts of things you're talking about.
Jazz have got their own way to do harmonic analysis as well. They've got other symbols too, I found. Their contemporary way.
It's a funny area. In general, of course, jazz musicians work from chords, and we're used to working from chord charts and lead sheets and things like that. And because classical musicians tend to work from the score with everything absolutely notated, there's just a slightly different perspective there, I would say. And it brings to mind an example that I find quite interesting, and that is that when I think at the time when you were in my class, there was a lady called Jennifer Milne who was running the theory department, and she was very good. She was an American or a Canadian lady, and I had to I had to work under her, obviously. But in one of her handout sheets, she presented an analysis of the well-known jazz standard, "All the Things You Are," which I've known for 40 years or something, and it's one of the most standard of jazz standards that jazz musicians have been playing for a very, very long time. And she analysed it based on the first chord, which is F minor, which I couldn't help but find slightly amusing, and I wouldn't mean ever to put her down by saying that, but it was so different to the jazz thing, which is, and I think the jazz one is actually correct. But this actually serves to underline the thing I mentioned before, that you can look at analysis in a couple of different ways. So her analysis would have been that it's in the key, it's got 4 flats. The first chord is F minor, and then it's B flat minor, and it's E flat seventh, and then it's A flat major, etc. And the standard analysis for jazz people is that it's in A flat major, it ends up resolving to A flat major at the end of the piece, which in general is one of the more concrete ways of saying what key a piece is in, where does it resolve to at the end. So therefore everybody looks at the F minor as the 6th chord, and the B flat minor as the 2 chord, and the E flat as the 5, and the A flat of course is the 1, and proceed from there. Whereas hers was, F minor was 1 and B flat minor was 4, and E flat 7th was flat 7th, and A flat major was 3. And so when it got to it, and so it was really. I remember telling a couple of jazz musicians, and they found it quite humorous as well. But that might be one example of the way that jazz musicians and classical musicians look at harmony differently. Even though that same lady Jennifer, she cited an example of a Jimi Hendrix piece in one of her handouts, which I thought was great to see, that she'd listened to a lot of different kinds of music, even though she wasn't a heavyweight classical theorist, but I still think that people that are coming from the jazz, contemporary, maybe even rock side of things from a very chordal perspective, are involved in popular music and popular song before they're involved in classical music and might understand what makes a Beethoven sonata tick or whatever. So it's just a different perspective, you know. All of the theorists that are coming from a jazz point of view that I might be aware of or occasionally read or whatever tend to be coming from that chordal perspective I mentioned, but have a great deal of knowledge about classical music, but they're coming at it from that point of view. It's a very interesting area. It also reminds me, I mean, I'm just sort of being a bit stream of consciousness here, but something that my mentor, Mike Nock, who's a very well-known veteran jazz pianist, of course, mentioned about Murray Pariah, who's an absolutely wonderful classical pianist whose Bach playing I'm incredibly fond of and I'm very impressed by. But Mike told me that he'd read an interview. Actually, I did read the same interview with Murray, and he goes about analysing the classical pieces that he's playing, even though he's a traditional classical player, and I'm sure he doesn't improvise, or he might tinker away, but he doesn't improvise like most classical pianists don't, like in public at least. He said he really likes to look at the harmony the way jazz guys. He really thinks that the way jazz guys understand the harmony of classical music being so chord and harmonically orientated is the way that you should be, even if you're a classical pianist. So he obviously knows a lot. He would thoroughly understand the harmonic structures of the pieces that he plays, whereas in my experience with classical musicians, and this isn't to denigrate classical music in that one iota because I adore it. You couldn't have jazz without that music, really, if you really look at the evidence. But I'm surprised how often classical pianists that might be studying with me just don't even know the difference between a C seventh chord and a C major seventh chord. So in other words, this sort of, without wanting to generalise, the typical piano student tends to play these pieces that are incredibly complex, but not really necessarily understand that much about the detail of the harmony beyond what the broad key that it might be in, and maybe some brief, some of the obvious modulations that might go on. They don't tend to have enough time to be taught the absolute nuts and bolts in every detail of these compositions that they're playing. Whereas the people, as I mentioned, Keith Jarrett, Bill Evans I mentioned as well, these are guys that were very, very good classical pianists but chose to go into jazz, but that obviously play the classical music from an improviser's perspective and understand it, and they're able to extrapolate those ideas and utilise them in their jazz and improvising.
Tim?
And I just see that's kind of the way I am.
Great interview.
That's the way I roll. That's a common term.
Great interview with you today.
Oh, thanks, mate. It's a pleasure. It's just feels like scratching the surface, really.
Where can people find you on social media?
Look, I'm not big on. I've got a Facebook page.
Yep.
And as I think you alluded to when we've had a little bit of contact in recent times, there are a number of my solo piano compositions up there on my Facebook page, which I've also put onto YouTube. I've got a very small, very modest YouTube channel that I will be putting some more music up on and attempting to bolster in terms of subscribers and get it out there more. I've spent so much time writing my music and practicing my music that it doesn't leave much time for anything else. But I've consciously made a decision that the one I'm about to put up in the next day or so will be the last one that I compose for a while, because it's so time consuming and I can devote myself to getting onto a CD and do a bit more self-promotion. So yeah, at the moment it's just Facebook and one small dedicated YouTube channel, which is the one with the orange dot and the initial. churches and music that I discovered when I did a trip to Germany a number of years ago and had to write a report and submit video evidence of it. So there's some video clips of a guy demonstrating some of the Bach's keyboard instruments, all the instruments of Bach at Bach's day there as well.
All right, thank you for listening to today's podcast with Tim Bruer. Please remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel, donate to the show on my GoFundMe page. This helps with purchasing equipment. Also, to get your 1 month free trial of Grammarly Premium, the links are in the description below, and your 3 months free trial of Amazon Music Unlimited. You can find that on my website. Also, subscribe, turn on the notifications, leave a review as well. See you later.
Hike the trail? Check. Order takeout? Check. Schedule heart checkup? Done. We've all adapted to a new way of living. Keep your healthcare on schedule with Johns Hopkins Medicine, where your health and safety are our highest priorities. We're ready to care for you through virtual and in-person visits across Maryland and the greater Washington region. Your health, our experts, safely caring for you. Schedule your care now. Learn more at hopkinsmedicine.org/safe. Hike the trail? Check. Order takeout? Check. Schedule heart checkup? Done. We've all adapted to a new way of living. Keep your healthcare on schedule with Johns Hopkins Medicine, where your health and safety are our highest priorities. We're ready to care for you through virtual and in-person visits across Maryland and the greater Washington region. Your health, our experts, safely caring for you. Schedule your care now. Learn more at hopkinsmedicine.org/safe.